we think we brought the sides closer than they've been in a very long time, but we're not there yet, and it needs to start happening. We need to start. I think this is going to be a very critical week. This week is going to be a really important week in which we have to make a determination about whether this is an endeavor that we want to continue to be involved in, or if it's time to sort of focus on some other issues that are equally, if not more important in some cases. But we want to see it happen. There are reasons to be optimistic, but there are reasons to be realistic, of course, as well. We're close, but we're not close enough.
It sounds to me like he's getting ready to lay the foundation for Trump to say, all right, we did the best we could. We're walking. How do you see it?
I don't know. I hope you're right. You know, my view is that the wrong people like Waltz, people like Rubio, leaders in the Senate and others, all lured President Trump into a giant bear trap. That bear trap is called Ukraine. The only thing he had to do after he was elected and inaugurated was say, that's it, I'm out. I didn't start this. I don't support it. I'm ending all military support to Ukraine. I'm withdrawing all U.S. military personnel, civilian personnel, everyone from Ukraine. Had he done that, this war would already be over. And I suspect that the Russians would have gotten 80 to 90% of what they're asking for now anyway. Now they're probably going to demand more. All you have to do is go back and look at April 2022. Look at what the Russians were ready to settle for then. Fast forward to 2023. Where were they? What would they have settled for? Then move up to today. The Russians were always ready to negotiate. They were always ready to compromise to get a true peace, a neutral Ukraine that was denazified. That was always the goal. It was not to kill 1 million Ukrainians. That was never on the agenda. It was never designed to attack Europe or expand Russian control of the Baltic states or anything else. It's all nonsense. Those days are over. They don't live in the 19th century. We apparently are living very comfortably in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We got to get out of it.
Well,
that's what should happen.
Perfectly on schedule, because I have this soundbite here from Putin himself from a few days ago, where he was talking to his General Gerasimov on a VTC, which they telecast into celebration the end of the Kursk operation, where they had pushed out the Ukraine side from the last of the little villages there back to the border. And he said something really, really important to your point here about where his mind is and what may be next.
The Kiev regime's adventure has completely failed, and the huge losses suffered by the enemy, including among the most combat-ready, prepared, and equipped, including the Western samples of the Navy, the assault units of the Special Forces, will certainly affect the entire line of combat. The complete defeat of the enemy in the Kursk border creates conditions for further successful actions of our troops and on other important sections of the front, and brings the defeat of the neo-Nazi regime closer.
You see, this so important. He said the Kursk issue, and this also talked about pushing the Ukrainians out of the Belgorod area, set the conditions for the next phase. And he did not say to try to find a negotiated settlement. He said the destruction of the Kiev regime. He sounds like he's got this a different outcome in mind than anybody else in the West.
Well, I think he sees no alternative to it. Sadly, no one has been willing to sit down and say, you know, you're right. This regime in Kiev is the wrong regime. We need a neutral state, and we need to demilitarize this Nazi-inspired military establishment. We should have sat down and acknowledged that right off the bat. Now, how you do it, how fast you do it, that's another matter. But those are things that are easy to acknowledge. That's why President Trump had nothing to do with that. He came into a very different set of circumstances. He always had the opportunity to walk away. And I'm sure that there will be people at the Rand Corporation, the Hudson Institute, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, to talk about a misnomer for a title. All of these organizations will initially publish things saying, Trump lost Ukraine. You know, it's sort of like, who lost China? As though China had ever been ours. It was never ours to hold on to. We didn't lose it. Ukraine has never belonged to us. We're not losing it. But this is the sort
Great
of
point.
stupidity that passes for, sadly in this day and age, bipartisan policy.
And what do you make of then the next comment there? He was talking to Gerasimov there, and I wanted to put what he also said to him, because here he's talking about not just reestablishing the border, but he's talking about continuing combat operations.
In accordance with your instructions, the creation of a security zone in the border areas of the Sumy region of Ukraine continues. 4 settlements have been liberated. The total area of the controlled territory is more than 90 square kilometers. In addition, in the Belgorod region, units of the Savor Group have completed the destruction of Ukrainian sabotage groups in the area of the settlement of Popovka.
So he doesn't have any intention on stopping anything. So where does this leave us then? Where does this leave Trump? Where does it leave Ukraine if they're still trying to seek this mythical negotiated settlement that doesn't include giving over any territory, doesn't include demilitarization, and doesn't include denazification? Where does that leave us?
Well, if we continue to pretend that we are the world's nanny and try to slap President Putin on the hand with the ruler and punish him for his failure to adhere to whatever we think he should do, then I suppose we go down a blind alley where we miss the opportunity to normalize relations with Russia, which could be both commercially and economically very valuable to us, miss the opportunity for understanding that could help us in other theaters avoid conflict. But I suppose that could happen. We are that foolish and stupid. Remember what George Kennan used to say: most of what we do overseas is designed to please ourselves at home. In other words, it's national narcissism. We insist on seeing ourselves as the good guys with the white hats who are always right. Well, we should have learned by now, certainly since 1965, that we are not always the good guys. We are not always right. In fact, I would argue that for the most part, we've been dead wrong. And that's why we've spent trillions and trillions of dollars, lost tens of thousands of lives, killed millions of people, and accomplished nothing. If perhaps the exception being that we have alienated a substantial portion of the world's population and countries. This is craziness. It needs to go away, but I'm afraid you're going to see some of it. It's back to this nonsense. How did we lose China? The next thing is, how did we lose Ukraine? And so nobody's willing to stand up and say, all right, let's have the American people vote on it. Do you want to ship 3 or 4 million American soldiers to Europe and to do this within 12 to 18 months and build up a huge anti-submarine capability and space-based arsenal for intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance to deal with all of this, and all the planes and missiles that we've got now, triple their number? Is that what you want to do? And see what Americans say. I think most Americans will say, what, have you lost your mind? Because that's what you're talking about. So the notion that we have much to say at this point is silly. We already look quite ridiculous today. I don't think most Americans realize it. This latest tariff business, where things were not carefully targeted, it was a blanket approach. And everybody is saying, oh, well, everybody's coming to do business on our terms. No. That's not true. Well, we showed China. No. Yeah, we showed China that we're fools, and the Chinese are completely undisturbed by us. They have other markets and other opportunities. We've got to get into the real world. We've got to leave the phony world behind. President Trump needs to do that.
On that same topic there, one of our viewers sent a note in that was asking about this whole North Korea issue. For the first time, Russia officially announced that North Koreans had actually participated in this. And one of our viewer here says that this person he talked to, an FSB veteran, who never denied North Korean troops, has said that they were brought in as a favor, but their tactics were awful. They ignored the advice by the Russian generals, preferring old Soviet tactics. That lines up with what I had seen and actually speculated, and wondered your thoughts on this, and that the North Korean troops were never brought in to help Russia, but as a sop to Kim Jong-un to say, hey, he wanted to get his troops, bloody their noses and get them some combat experience to go back to the rest of their troops there. How do you see this whole North Korea issue in terms of this war?
Depending upon who you want to talk to, the North Koreans had about 800, maybe a few more hundred observers watching what was going on. Kim has been very, very intent on bringing troops in and having them exposed to fire. Now, that may seem strange, but you've got to understand that throughout its history, North Korea has always been able to turn, no matter what happened, to Russia for support and assistance. President Putin did what President Xi wanted and supported the original plan to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula that was set forth under President Trump. You'll recall he went to Hanoi to sign this. And at the same time, Kim from North Korea went to Beijing to see President Xi. And I keep trying to get people to understand that Xi is in most ways similar to a Chinese emperor and controls enormous influence, power, commerce, and the largest nation in the world in terms of population. And he told Kim, you go to Hanoi and sign it. It made a lot of sense. It was about incrementally removing, neutralizing nuclear weapons over many years, about 5 to 7. And at the same time, commensurate with the removal of nuclear warheads and so forth, you would see a downsizing in terms of the U.S. military presence on the peninsula. That, of course, was queered by Mr. Pompeo, the Secretary of State, with his able associate, John Bolton, who was the NSA. And they convinced Trump it was too risky, can't do it, don't want to do it. So now Kim then turned back to Russia for help and assistance and support. North Korea is always on the edge of circling the drain economically. But thanks to Russia, it has survived. It's actually getting healthier. And now China has chipped in a big way with Russia to support North Korea. But it's Russia that the Koreans feel obligated to support. And so his view was, if I can get some Korean troops into this, it's not just a question of being bloodied. We want to be able to say we fought and died shoulder to shoulder with you in a war that was exclusively in your interest. We simply came as friends to support it. Now, in reality, you're right. They went in, they observed, they didn't learn very much, and they repeated pretty much what we've done. If you go back to 2003 and you look at some of the dumbest things imaginable that the Army did on its way into Iraq, perhaps the dumbest one of all is the quote-unquote deep attack by helicopters. And that whole thing foundered on above Najaf. I don't want to go into detail, but there was very little thought, very little planning and preparation. Originally, there were 3 battalions, then one got lost. The other 2 went over there. They were all shot to pieces. The helicopters were effectively put out of action. It was a catastrophe. But the reason we did that is that that's what we had practiced in peacetime for many, many years when fighting the so-called Soviet enemy. And even though there were many at the time that said, you'll never get through the air defenses, we're not talking about the high end, we're talking about the low end, anti-aircraft guns and so forth. People didn't listen. We modeled it in computers, and so we repeated it. And so you have Messieurs Petraeus and Wallace who concoct this crazy idea, go and do it. It's a complete disaster. Now, I don't know what we have today for thinking on that scale, but that's very much what the Koreans did when they were finally brought in. They repeated what they knew. And that's what armies do. They've always done things that way. You know from personal experience, Dan, you don't show up and suddenly the light goes on and you learn new approaches, new tactics, new battle drills. First, you've got to have a base or a foundation of tactical competence and tactical battle drills. Then you can adjust from those, provided those are realistic. We did that very well in 1991. Today, I don't know how it would go because things have changed so remarkably in modern warfare. But I think that's really what the former FSB officer was pointing to. We shouldn't be surprised by any of it. But the real reason, as I said before, is to cultivate friendship with Russia, because Russia is the friend of last resort for North Korea.